want to talk a little bit about bird flu and the potential for lockdowns, potential for a lot of things, but we're going to talk about recent history of bird flu, do a little update, precautions you can take, signs and symptoms, treatment, and there are going to be vaccines. They're already working on vaccines. I've seen some things that said they're already in mass production or preparing to be on vaccines. But what is bird flu? I know we've talked about it before, we've spoken about it before, but if you're new, highly pathogenic influenza A H5N1 virus infection reported in a person in the United States. So that was big news, April 1st, 2024. It happened here in Texas. A person was infected with H5N1 HP, highly pathogenic AI avian influenza. Happened in Texas. As reported by Texas, confirmed by the CDC, this person had exposure to dairy cattle in Texas, presumed to be infected with HPAI, H5N1 viruses. The patient reported eye redness consistent with conjunctivitis as their only symptom, and is recovering. The patient was told to isolate and is being treated with an antiviral drug for flu. The infection does not change the H5N1 bird flu human health assessment for the U.S. general public, which the CDC considers to be low. So there was one case in April in Texas. They treated it like the flu, antivirals, conjunctivitis, and we'll get into that. We'll get into symptoms. How do you know if you're infected? We'll get into things like treatment, but it is worth pointing out, as the article said, at this point, it's considered low risk. It's not spreading from person to person. We certainly all hope that it never does. If that did happen, we'd see something that we're already used to, right, that we've all been through recently, which is mass panic, mass hysteria, pandemic, right, massive pandemic. Likely we would see things like lockdowns and whatnot. So going to the CDC, you want to pull as much information off the CDC website. Bird flu, also known as avian influenza, is a viral infection that can spread from birds to humans. Here are some precautions you can take to prevent the spread of bird flu. Precautions seem like a good thing to dig into. Right now, avoid contact with birds, right? It generally is from birds, so we're starting to see cows. It does spread to other animals. We have made videos on that before, but avoid contact with birds. Keep your distance from wild birds and other animals. Don't touch, feed, or handle them. If you must handle infected or potentially infected birds, wear protective equipment like gloves, N95 respirator, well-fitting face mask, eye protection after touching birds. Wash your hand with soap and water. Avoid touching your mouth, nose, or eyes. That's from CDC. Avoid contact with contaminated areas. Wash your hands after being in an area where birds and other wildlife are living or nesting, such as parks or zoos. Carefully clean and disinfect contaminated areas. Wash your hands often. Wash your hands often with soap and water, especially before and after handling food, in particular raw poultry. And then take other precautions in preparing food. Keep raw meats away from other foods and use different utensils for cooked and raw meat. Make sure meat is cooked until steaming hot, and wash eggshells in soapy water before you crack or cook them. So good general precautions from the CDC. Once again, we're in a low risk situation right now, but as with any of these types of things, any of these types of pandemics, you just never know. And certainly we hope the answer is never. Never does bird flu take hold, does it start transmitting from person to person, but have to consider a possibility, and it doesn't hurt to be prepared and look at some of the aspects that you might be interested, such as CDC precautions. So OSHA has an interesting article on general precautions for bird flu. Avian flu is a viral disease, and it can be very contagious, even deadly in poultry, chickens, ducks, turkeys. Of great concern, the highly pathogenic avian influenza, HPAI, H5N1, H7N9, and we did a video on that, all the different H's and N's and what they all mean. Not going to cover that right now. If avian flu viruses are detected in the United States, or if you have travel assignments in countries that have avian flu outbreaks, take appropriate precautions. So symptoms as humans, it's good to know the symptoms. How do you know if you got it? And you probably won't be surprised by some of this. We've been through this before. Avian flu symptoms in humans range from fever, cough, sore throat, muscle aches, nausea, abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea, eye infections, difficulty breathing, pneumonia, severe respiratory disease. Symptoms may depend on which virus cause the infection, but more similar to those humans have seasonal influenza. So this looks a lot like the flu, could be a lot worse, right? How humans are infected, we already said that. Contact with sick poultry or surfaces soiled with discharge from the mouths or beaks or feces, inhaling contaminated particles from poultry. Treatment, so they are saying antiviral drugs, right? Treatment with antiviral drugs. Some of those may be effective, certainly depending on the situation, the strain, the mutation, everything that's going on at the time. General precautions. This was OSHA. Wash hands thoroughly for at least 15 seconds and frequently, preferably with soap and water or an alcohol-based hand rub with at least 60% alcohol. Get your hand sanitizer if soap and water are not available. Avoid contact with possibly infected poultry. Precautions when exposed. Use appropriate personal protective equipment, including disposable gloves, gloves that can be disinfected, protective clothing, long sleeve coveralls, disposable shoe coverings, safety goggles, and of course your N95 mask. So maybe stock up now, maybe don't. That's certainly up to you. If you don't have any masks left over from last time, they could become very popular if something like this does happen, right? So CDC signs and symptoms. We talked about signs and symptoms, how to test. So how do you know? How do you know if you've got bird flu other than I feel like I have the flu? How do you know? Well, you will be surprised to hear bird flu virus infection. People cannot be diagnosed by clinical signs and symptoms. Laboratory testing is needed. Bird flu virus infection is usually diagnosed by collecting a swab from the upper respiratory tract, nose, or throat of the sick person. So Q-tip up the nose, it sounds like. We've all been there. We're all familiar with that. You probably still have some of your Q-tips lying around. It does say some antiviral drugs can be used to treat and prevent illness. Good to know. And of course, so I was doing a little research here. Penn Research develops experimental mRNA avian flu vaccine. So the good news is they're working on an mRNA vaccine. Penn Research has the article. I'm not going to read too much into it, but certainly that is a possibility, right? I know everyone gets excited. Sorry, this Texas heat is killing me. Everyone gets excited when we start talking about nose swabs and mRNA and all that kind of thing. But it's one of those maybes, one of those what happens, what if. Bird flu itself, certainly no joke. It's been spreading around for hundreds of years, jumping from animal to animal, and we're starting to see it maybe mutating. Maybe we've seen some gain of function. I know we've seen some articles. I've read some articles suggesting there's been gain of function research done on bird flu over the years, and certainly any pathogen can be weaponized, and they've been weaponized for centuries, going back to the rabbit flu. I think we spoke about that. Something like 5000 BC. I'm just going off the cuff here. They had weaponized the rabbit flu. I think it was against the Mesopotamians, but I'm totally making that up at this point. But it did happen. There was a point in ancient history. It was the first time a pathogen was weaponized. Basically, they took a bunch of affected people, and they're like, you go that way, and sent them at the cities of their enemies. So weaponization of pathogens happens, but they can occur naturally, and they certainly have as well. Just wanted to jump in on bird flu. We're starting to hear more about it in the news. There's certainly a lot of talk about things like disease X, which is sort of a generic placeholder for whatever the next pandemic is, and certainly there will be. Historically, there have been many pandemics throughout history, and we will have another one at some point. That's near mathematical certainty. We just don't know when, right? Is it 2024? Is it going to happen again this year? And will it be like the last one? I think we're all old enough that we haven't forgotten the last pandemic and everything that went along with that. And I think just from reading about bird flu, H5N1, HPAI, you're starting to see a lot of similarities, a lot of crossover, right? You have the nose swabs, you have we don't have person-to-person transmission, and hopefully we never will, right? That's certainly not a good thing. That's not anything that we would ever want, but if we ever do have person-to-person transmission, you have that potential for a high lethality rate on something like this. They're already saying, hey, you just need your N95 masks, you get your nose swab, you get your mRNA, and you're good to go. So we'll see how it goes. I know a lot of people I talk to feel like something's coming in 2024. I think a lot of people can just feel it. You feel like something's coming. I can't say that this is it. Certainly hope it's not, right? That's the last thing we need, is to go through something like that. Just sharing some thoughts. You could call it conspiracy. Most of the stuff I'm getting is off CDC, right? I'm trying not to add too much mass hysteria or speculation, but certainly as a prepper, if your goal is to be prepared, you got to stay ahead of this kind of stuff. You got to see what's going out there in the world, and certainly bird flu is no joke. So, as always, hope that helps out. Thank you for watching, and we appreciate you.